I think you can imagine from a Bankserv perspective, nobody in South Africa have ever heard of Lusis TANGO. When we did the initial evaluation, if it weren't for HP that came to us and told us about it, I don't think up to today we'd have known that a product like TANGO do exist in the world. When we went to our board committee technology, which from a governance perspective are there from a overseas function as part of our main board to look at that technology, and we made a recommendation that we felt that TANGO was the solution we go. They weren't too happy for us to do so. We managed to convince them, and they believed that we did a proper evaluation, and they agreed to support us when we made a presentation to our main board. When we went to our main board, it was not that easy to get them convinced that this is the right solution to go for us. First of all, as I said, nobody knew about TANGO. The board believed that we will be introducing risk into the payments framework within South Africa, not only because it is a new product, but also because nowhere in the world has it actually been running on a non-stop platform. So we're introducing two new concepts actually within our card switching environment. They agreed that the only way that we're going to get them to approve that if we do run a pilot, and that's what we agreed, and they suggested we do so. But from a pilot perspective, it's also very important to know that although they agreed to the pilot with within a certain time frame, the fact that we had to have really clearly defined success criteria, and that we had to define the scope of the pilot as well, so that there was no uncertainty in anybody's mind about what we're going to do and how we're going to achieve it. Defining the scope of the pilot was actually, in one way, difficult, in the other way, it was quite easy. Within Bankserv, our online card environment consists of 4 key projects, being ATM, POS, which is debit card and credit card authorization, and our real-time clearing services. We could have decided to only use one product for a pilot. We also had an opportunity to utilize the switching functionality, which we do for Namibia, because it's a standalone system, a very much scaled-down version of the South African card switching environment. The problem with that is if we used any one of those as a possible pilot, our board could always have turned around to management and say, but you've only did a small component of the system, therefore you haven't proven the whole functionality of TANGO as a product. The same with the Namibia switch as well. Because of a scaled-down version, they could have said, but you don't have the same functionality to do that. We then agreed with Lusis that it will be a full migration from base 24 to TANGO. In other words, that we have the South African card switching environment as a fully fledged, migrated, production-ready migration to do so. And that's the base of the stuff. From a pilot perspective, we also looked from a success criteria. We also had to look at the functionality. It had to meet full functionality. The performance of the system had to be sort of met. We put a performance measurement of 300 transactions per second down as minimum requirements from a performance perspective. We had to make sure that the full recoverability of the system is placed. In other words, that we were able to sort of force a hardware, network, software failure, and the system had to automatically fail over and keep on processing. That active processing functionality must be 100% functional, because we do use active today, and the banks are using it extensively. It's to such a nature that they switch between the production and alternative processing environment without us even knowing that, so it had to work. The monitoring capability of the system must be proven to be worked, that our staff have to be fully trained. Bankserv have a policy whereby we try and be vendor independent. So the agreement with Lusis as well, that they would train our technical people, our operational people to be self-sufficient. And all of those things were the things that we had to have in place as part of the success criteria. The other thing as well, which was really part of it, is that our clients, the banks, were not allowed to make one single line of code change in their own applications. So everything we do from a migration perspective had to be contained within the Bankserv environment, which by itself is also a challenge to make sure that we do that, replace the base 24 functionality with a TANGO functionality without impacting any one of our clients from an interface perspective. I think first of all functionality, that it had to meet the functionality of our current functionality within base 24, that there should be no difference in that. Performance, 300 transactions per second, that the internal performance of TANGO should be no different to what we experience on base 24 today. So if I measure the internal throughput of base 24 versus the throughput of a transaction in TANGO, that it should be no different. In fact, TANGO, if it would be better, but it should not be worse than base 24. The training aspects, that our people must be trained, fully trained in being self-sufficient, because that's part of our strategic direction at Bankserv. Don't want to be dependent on any vendor as far as software is concerned. The monitoring capability, that both online and from a operational monitoring and a technical support monitoring, that the capability of the system must be proven to be there. And I think the final one is that we were to do the migration without any impact on the bank. Banks were not allowed to make any changes to the environment, so the whole migration of base 24 to TANGO must be contained within the Bankserv environment. From a pilot perspective, the project started in the third week of October 2010, when we really started with the definition of the requirements. Because of the limitation from, or the deadline imposed on Bankserv management by the board to have a pilot completed and a full recommendation to be brought ready by the end of June 2011, the process of starting work is, as the requirements were defined and agreed and signed off by Bankserv in South Africa, those requirements were forwarded on to Lusis in Paris, where they started with the build of the system. The first drop of code, which contained the core functionality of TANGO, was delivered to Bankserv in the third week of January 2011, where we started with the implementation, and we then started with the actual testing of the functionality of TANGO during the first week of February. We continued with testing while non-critical components of the system were built, an additional functionality which Bankserv required, and there was a number of, in total, 7 software releases over the time period to make sure that we sort of get to the point in time where the total system was delivered to Bankserv in time for final testing and to do that. I think the biggest problem we experienced was actually twofold. One was we elected to use a test simulator test tool called Asterix, and to get the actual configuration of Asterix, especially in the RTC, real-time clearing environment, sorted out, and that took some time to do so. But once we've done that, we were able to sort of conduct the testing on it. The other big problem that we experienced was related to ODBC driver and timeout of transactions initially, which resulted in the system not being able to really achieve any performance results out of it. But the matter was addressed through HP, and an international fix on the ODBC driver was implemented, which I released internationally as well. And once we've got that implemented, we really started to, the whole system started to take traction. And we then really started to successfully test and implement the solution within our environment. From a risk mitigating perspective, I think the biggest thing is that we were able to prove that TANGO were able to replace the functionality that we had within base 24. One of the other areas of risk that our board members sort of raised during our recommendation was the capability of Lusis to support us in the whole rollout and going in future. And I think this is the one thing that we did experience both from Lusis and HP, that the commitment from a support perspective is something that we've never experienced from any other vendor in any of our other projects we did. The commitment from Lusis, if we did identify a problem, was that they worked around 24 around the clock to resolve those issues. The same with HP is that, and I think that proved to ourselves that from a risk perspective that we could rely on Lusis and on HP to really focus and get the pilot being a success. From a Bankserv perspective, we also had to make sure that we kept on selling and communicating the process that we made with the pilot to the banks. So we also implemented a communication process where during the life of the pilot, we on a regular basis met with all stakeholders in the industry, technical, business, regulatory, to give them a feedback of where we stand. And I also believe that that played a huge role in our stakeholders to start accepting and knowing what we're doing with TANGO. And by doing that, we also, I believe, made them aware of our successes and where we stand with the process, that we're not trying to hide. And I think the other thing that we did from a Bankserv management perspective is that we had a very open and trusted relationship with our stakeholders. If something went wrong, we communicated that went wrong. If something went well, we also communicated that, and we kept an open, trusted communication with our stakeholders so that they know exactly what's happening, that we aren't trying to hide something. I think from a pilot site, we were limited to what we had to do, and I think we stuck to that, and we were able to meet the expectations. From a production implementation perspective, we agreed that from a production rollout that we would not implement anything into production or migrate any product in production during the latter half of 2011, due to the fact that the banks were not ready and they did not scope or plan for any migration project from a resource perspective from their side. Our migration process into production started on the 6th of February 2012 with the certification testing of real-time clearing. We decided on real-time clearing because it's a smaller system and there's only 5 banks that are involved in that, and it also gave an opportunity to get a feel for what will happen once we've implemented production. We met our sort of target date, which was set for the middle of April to implement in April, and we did so. 2 weeks into production implementation, we did pick up a problem on RTC where, through our complete lack of understanding and knowledge in working in the new OSS environment with SQL MX on a non-stop, we had a database index issue which resulted in transactions being timed out. It was easy enough fixed on the production environment and resolved, and since then we've never had a problem again on RTC. But we then realized that if you look at that type of scenario where we have a small system and a small impact like that over a couple of minutes impacted close to 900 transactions, we realized if you look at the ATM environment where we process up to 2.5 million transactions per day, that if we have something that goes wrong, the impact from a bank and client perspective is a lot bigger because of the amount of transactions. And then we decided to mitigate the risk of such a possible event by extending our certification test period. The way that we did that as well is that although we do comprehensive certification testing with the banks in our test environment, we also followed a process where once we felt happy that our certification testing and the test environment have proven that system work, we started with production cutover test, where on a Monday morning or in the week, some non-peak processing month, we would cut over from base 24 onto TANGO in the production environment. We started off with an hour at a time, then 2 hours, then 3 hours, 5 hours, and eventually up to 24 hours at a time, to make sure that we reduce the risk of a full implementation. Not only then did we check the online capability of the system, but we also started looking at the reporting side of the system, where the banks were receiving real production-like reports, which they then could test back and verify against what happened in their own production environments. I think by extending that time period based on experience with RTC and doing so, we actually did a lot to mitigate the risk as well. And we were able to successfully implement the ATM environment on the 10th of September of 2012. And up to today, we were processing an average something on a normal day, around about 700,000 transactions per day. And on the peak, which up to now during month end, we're starting to reach a processing capacity of 1.2 million transactions. Our next challenge will be now at month end, on the 30th of September, where we expect processing to reach 2.5 million transactions per day due to the nature of the business that occurs on that specific day.